Welcome in. I am Mike Pilch. Another episode of Pilch's Perspective. Been a little while. Kind of had to do the family thing over Easter. Kind of had to do some real life stuff. So we get to it when we can. Today, going to look at salary history, if you want to call it that, in Major League Baseball. Now, right before opening day, a little late on this, but life happens. Francisco Lindor signed his 10-year, $340 million deal with the New York Mets. The latest player to sign a huge contract. Earlier in spring training, it was Fernando Tatis Jr. signing a 14-year deal, well north of $300 million. And Tatis is a guy that hasn't been around as long and proven as much, even though he seems like a total, complete, and absolute stud. So it's another athlete and baseball player getting his big payday. And I've had a theory for a little while that it's not worth as much if you're a baseball player to sign that kind of a deal. Now, I get on owners in sports all the time because I know their books are closed with the exception of a couple teams that we publicly know. But owners are kind of the bane of my existence and always have been. If you really get into the history of sports and labor issues, and these are businessmen. They're there to make money and invest. Okay. So I definitely have issues when owners cry poor. These are ownership groups worth in the billions. So I have billions to spend, but that's a different story. But I actually don't have an issue with it if there's an owner that refuses to give a guy that kind of a contract, specifically in baseball. Now, it's different in the other sports. You get because of the CBAs, in the NBA, there's max contracts you can sign for so many players, maximum amount of money. And I'm not necessarily a fan of putting a maximum amount of money that an individual can make, but that's just me. But things are set up differently. In baseball, it's kind of a free for all. There is actually a limits or a penalty that you go above that kind of a salary structure and there's penalties for it. But nonetheless, I think if you're an NBA player, it's kind of worth a big deal because, as we know, in basketball, the great players dominate that game more than any other sport. They're on the floor all the time. They play offense and defense. It's not a mistake that in the NBA, its entire history, teams dominate for a decade or half a decade. You don't get individual titles very often. Okay. They come in huge lumps. And as you saw with Cavs Warriors or Lakers Celtics in the 80s, Bulls Jazz a couple of years, Spurs, you can go on and on. They get there multiple times. It's because the great players dominate that sport more. For all the talk of quarterback being the most important position, it's an NBA superstar that dominates the game more than anything else. So I think if that, along with their brand and the way they can draw in viewership and put people in the seats because of who they are, totally makes sense to me to have an NBA superstar, LeBron James or, Kevin Durant, put your name on them to make that kind of money, because I think they're worth it. I think you get that kind of return both in the standings and with playoff runs and titles and at the gate. I think baseball's different. I'm not sure if it's worth it in the NFL because the NFL is a team sport. I know the quarterback's important. I know a pass rusher is important, a left tackle, now a stud, do everything, wide receiver, a shutdown corner. I get that. Those are rare and they're worth a lot. Are they worth that much? I don't know, because I'm still, in football, you're kind of a product of the team around you largely. Hockey, maybe for a goaltender, you're worth it, I think. But in baseball, I don't know that it is, because instead of signing one guy to an enormous deal, you could get 3, 4, 5 really good players for that same amount of money. And baseball is very much team sport. In basketball, you have 2 good guys and you're really, really good. You can win the whole thing. Football, you basically need a full team. Goaltending, you get a hot goalie, you can make, or in hockey, you get a hot goalie, you can make a heck of a run. In baseball, you need a good team. Specifically, you need a deep pitching staff if you're going to win. There's plenty of teams in baseball history that have won the World Series or gotten to it with good pitching and just kind of blah offense. Usually the teams that didn't rank high in pitching during the year and made a run, it was either like Washington in 2019, their bullpen was so bad at the beginning of the year, it skewed their numbers, or there were injuries. It's really the pitching that does it. You look at those San Francisco teams that won 3 and 5 years earlier in the decade. I think the 2014 team was pretty good offensively, but the other two were just kind of blah. They had two good middle of the order hitters, Posey and Burrell in 2010, then just dudes, Cody Ross and Sanchez and Angel Pagan, just kind of guys who were there. Pat Burrell at the end of his career. In 2014, it was a little different. They had Posey, they had Hunter Pence. Sandoval's one of those guys that would just go crazy in the postseason. But they won because they had ridiculous pitching, both in the rotation with Lincecum, Kane, Bumgarner, Vogelsong for a year, Sanchez, Jonathan Sanchez, and a deep bullpen. That's why they won. And that's really, why you win in baseball. The problem with paying a pitcher in baseball is they only pitch once every 5 days. So they can't be out there every day. And a bullpen ace that can go one hitter or 3 innings out of the pen, like an Andrew Miller in 2016, a Josh Hader now, somebody like that, they can't go every day for you. So though their impact's probably larger, they also can't do it for you every day. And that's where that depth and that good team comes into play. Offensively, you usually, the more hitters you can get, the better, but it's usually 2 really good middle of the order hitters and a good leadoff man. Then you can just kind of notch in dudes that are solid the rest of the way. Bryce Harper signs a huge deal with Philadelphia. They haven't been to the playoffs with him. Now, you can argue the money was worth it when you look at stats like WAR and OPS plus, and his individual performance has been that of a player getting paid that much. But it doesn't lead to wins the same way it would for a star. Look at the contract like Trout signed, north of, what is it, 400 million, I think. The Angels have lost 90 games in a row, how many straight seasons, and have one playoff appearance with Trout, who, according to Baseball Reference, is the second coming of Mickey Mantle and Frank Robinson. So you'd rather have just a good, solid team and spend that money on a number of different players, or maybe help, if you're kind of rebuilding, help put more money in your farm system and player development than on one guy. That's the way I look at it. So I actually don't have a big problem when teams don't want to give enormous contracts to one player. We know normally the back end of those contracts don't work out well. A guy like Lindor, he's 27, he'll be 36, 37 when it's done. They'll probably get the most out of him. But I really don't have an issue with it, and I don't know that it's worth it. Even a team that has as much money as anyone, like the Boston Red Sox, their ownership refused to pay Mookie Betts that kind of a deal. They sent him to the Dodgers, whose ownership will pay for anything right now. And Boston got some really good young players in return, and in 2 years or so, is probably going to be a contender again. And I think that's the way you do it, more than having, you always have to have a good farm system to create your own players, because there's 25 guys at a roster, and you need to fill all those. So I don't know that it's worth it in baseball. It makes your fan base happy when your homegrown players are able to stay and you're committed and all that. I totally understand that, but financially, I don't know that it makes sense. Now, when you look at salaries in baseball history, despite what you may hear, they've always been enormous. The Players Association started publicly reporting salaries in 1985. The Baseball Hall of Fame now has on hand little transaction file cards dating back to way back when. A lot of the National League cards aren't available prior to World War II. Some are. So we have a good idea what guys get paid and contract details and all that. And I guess the first real salary milestone officially was Ty Cobb in 1913, got $10,000 in 1913. Now, if you look at the average American wage, it's weird. You go to the IRS.gov, archive.gov, any kind of official or what's supposed to be official website, all the numbers are different on average income by decade. I don't know why that is, just is, but the average American worker in 1910 got around $500. Ty Cobb was making 10 grand a year in 1913. Okay. Just to put it in perspective. You go back to the 1890s, one of the first superstars, somebody, a catcher named King Kelly, reportedly got as much as, I lost my place here, got as much as about $12,500 or as little as $1,750, depending on which author you read. None cited primary sources, but so we don't know. But even that lower number of $1,750 a year was enormous cash for the 1890s, a ridiculous amount of money for that time. Honus Wagner got as much as 10 grand as early as 1902. A Business Week article in 1985 said he got that salary in 1907. A Chicago newspaper reported in 1911 his salary that year was $12,000. This is all from my friends at Sabre and a nice little article that they wrote. That's really where I'm quoting all this information from. So we don't know. The point is, we don't know if somebody got more than 10,000 that Cobb did, but the point is Wagner was making a lot of money. These players, especially if they were stars, were making a ton of money even over 100 years ago. So Cobb was the first to really get a 5-figure salary officially that we know of in 1913. And he was also unique where ownership actually gave him multi-year contracts, which were rare then. You might get $12,000 a year. If your numbers weren't as good as the year before, you might get knocked down to $10,000 a year. So you played more year to year then. Multi-year contracts were much more rare. Cobb actually signed a 2-year deal. He signed in 1914 for $30,000 and signed a 1-year deal in 1921 for $25,000 to become the Tigers player manager. Now, in 1920, the average American income, depending on the source, was between $1,500 and $3,300. Cobb was making 25 grand that year. So the percentage increase isn't the same as it is now, but it was still a ridiculous amount of money. And the average player, not the Ty Cobb, the average player was making, I don't know, when you were an established regular, you were probably making in the realm of 5 to 10,000 that year. So you're getting the idea. When Shoeless Joe and the boys threw the World Series in 1919, the average American worker was probably around 1,500 to 3,000. Shoeless Joe was making $6 grand in 1919. He also had a number of successful businesses he ran in the offseason, a couple of valet services, a liquor store that were successful. He was fine. So it's not like players, no, they don't make the percentage increase that they do now. They've always made a ton of money. One of the other big milestones was Babe Ruth, of course, who got 52,000 in 1922. The year before, the Babe had maybe the greatest season in baseball history. Yankees drew 1.2 million fans for the second straight year, twice what they drew in 1919, which was the year before Ruth got there. So you saw the impact Ruth had at the turn aisle. The Babe later in his career got things settled, so he got a percentage of the gate as well. Your brand, your LeBron, people are coming to see you. People are paying TV advertising to see you. ABC and ESPN are making money because of you being there. You're making them money. That was the same way with Ruth 100 years ago, okay? That hasn't really changed. That's why those guys, it's a little different story. Joe DiMaggio, the first to make $100,000. That was in 1949, which was near the end of his career. Ted Williams got 90,000 in the early 50s. Probably would have hit 100,000 had his career, had he not had to serve some years in Korea. 1974, Dick Allen got to $250,000. Would have never guessed Dick Allen hit 250,000, but he did. Nolan Ryan, the first $1 million player, a 4-year free agent deal with the Astros, $1 million a season. He signed that in 1980. Catfish Hunter was the first big free agency pickup, going from the A's to the Yankees in 1975. Mike Schmidt topped his salary a couple of years later. I think Catfish signed a $239,000 deal that year. And he actually turned down higher deals from teams like the Kansas City Royals and the San Diego Padres. He just wanted to pitch in New York and for another contender, though the Royals are contenders in those years too. He just wanted a pitcher. I actually turned down more money at other places. The other big milestone was Kevin Brown in 1999. I remember that. coming off that great postseason he had with the Padres in '98. Brown signed a $108 million 7-year deal with the Dodgers. I don't think the Dodgers won anything while Brown was there. They were a nice, solid mid 80s or so win team. That was about it. Bobby Bonilla, we know he still gets paid by the Mets. Bobby Bonilla Day is celebrated by some every year. The first $5 million annual salary came to him in 1992. Albert Bell signed with the White Sox, $10 million a year in '97. And then the big monster modern deal was A-Rod, who got 10 years, $254 million by the Rangers in 2001. So when will the $50 million barrier be broken? It's probably going to happen, $50 million per year, because each season, first of all, you got to put inflation into it. So keep that in mind. Inflation plays a key, but you've still got bigger. I mean, Major League Baseball just signed $1 billion TV deals with TBS, and they're about to sign one with Fox. So their revenues are actually increasing. They're making more, and the owners see a lot of that money. So you're still going to have owners saying we make no money and we can't afford a guy for $20 million a year, even though, I mean, that's like a penny for these teams, who not only make a lot of money, are owned by multi-billionaire ownership groups. But you've got TV revenues, free agency, all the television revenues. These teams, when their local TV deals come up now, are signing huge deals. I think the Kansas City Royals, one of the smallest markets in baseball, now have one of the top 5 or 6 TV contracts. Almost every team's going to be able to spend money. Salary's going to go up and up. I really wonder, and I said that I'm not sure if it's worth it for an individual player in baseball to get that much. I don't think, I mean, the Boston Red Sox ownership isn't willing to pay someone that much. I don't know that many ownership groups are. The Dodgers will. The team that plays at the Bronx will. The Mets with Steve Cohen, who is, I think, personal net worth alone is $14 billion. So they can kind of do whatever they want. They just signed Lindor. Will they give a big deal to Conforto or DeGrom or somebody else? Who knows? I think even a guy like that has a limit. I don't know how many teams are going to be willing to hand out that kind of a deal when all these other teams keep producing all this pitching, all these bullpens that throw 100 miles an hour. And I'm going to get to that in a later thing, how they may have to make some changes and the difference with that. I don't know how many teams are willing to dish it out. Carlos Correa of the Astros just turned down a pretty big extension for well over 100 million, saying, no, I want a long deal with a lot of greenbacks. I don't know how many teams will offer that to him. You're going to have other young, good players hit free agency whose numbers are comparable to these guys that just signed all these massive deals. So you're going to have more and more guys wanting the payday where the market was set by Betts and Lindor and Tatis and all these other guys. I don't think that many owners are going to pay that, let alone multiple guys on one team. We know the Padres, who are a legitimate small market team, have 2 $300 million players and 2 $100 million players on their roster. And that's not including Snell and Darvish, who they got in trades. Hashtag owners who care. But it's just kind of interesting. I don't think that many guys are going to get those deals. They're going to have to take 100 or 200 million. Yeah, I know, for them. The Cubs are another team that don't be willing, and they got more money than anyone. They don't seem to be willing to sign guys to big deals, those kind of deals. So I'm curious how many guys are going to see that kind of money. And I know revenues are increasing, and I know the Players Association will let that be known. That's why this next CBA at the end of this upcoming season is just going to be awful and nasty. But I actually hope some financial information leaks, legitimate financial information leaks, so we have a truly better idea of what's going on. It's not hard to figure this money out. We have public records of local TV deals, their share of the pot with all the TV deals, because all the local deals go in, you get half that money, and then the other half is spread out to all the teams. So even a team making like 40 million a year is making close to 200 million a year when you in TV dollars when you add that up. You know what they get for, naming rights to stadiums. You know what their team payroll is. They have other expenses that we don't know about, but it's probably not anywhere near as high as their team payroll. It's not hard to get an idea of what these teams make. Forbes does a fantastic job with it. Fangraphs does a fantastic job with it. So the truth's kind of out there. And that being said, I don't have a problem with paying a guy a lot of money. I don't have a problem paying a guy an enormous salary for like 3 seasons. But I think to, in baseball, pay somebody that much, I don't know if it's worth it. I just mentioned, Dick Allen's White Sox. Dick Allen went to the postseason once in his career. Kevin Brown never got there with the Dodgers. They didn't come close while he was with the Dodgers. You look at a lot of those big deals. Baseball's a different sport. It's not basketball where one guy makes that much of a difference, or even hockey where a goaltender can make that much of a difference, especially in the postseason. I really don't know if it's worth paying one guy in baseball that much. When you've got the farm system, you can create your own players. You get them for at least 6 years, maybe sign them to their first good deal. You get them 8 or 9 years before they go free agent. And then you just let them move on, replace them with the next guy. Um, I don't have a problem with $100 million or something, but 300 million, even I find that hard to swallow. Wonder if that'll drive more people away from the game, knowing you don't make that kind of money, or owners aren't willing to pay that kind of money in that sport. I don't know. It's a lot of interesting stuff, I think, to look over and to think about. And those are my thoughts on it, and just a little quick history lesson on salaries in baseball. You could say these guys, they didn't get paid like that. They had jobs in the offseason. Read a lot of biographies on players and teams. A lot of those guys that worked in the offseason, specifically after the Second World War, and really once they were established big leaguers, they either owned their own restaurants or they were farmers and worked their own farm and things like that. They didn't need the job to make ends meet. There were guys who did work because they had nothing to do for 4 or 5 months out of the year, and they thought they'd supplement their income by doing something else. Ross Strickling, a pitcher for the Blue Jays, used to be for the Dodgers, is actually a financial analyst in the offseason. There's a lot of guys that actually do have jobs in the offseason now. You don't hear about it, though, because it's just, a different thing, and guys kind of have to train you around. But, those guys that played a long time ago, none of those guys are going hungry in retirement. There's a reason for that. So those are my thoughts. I am Mike Pilch. This is part of Pilch's perspective, as it always is. Hope you learned something today, and we will talk to you next time.